everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to another episode of The Healing Home. I'm your host, Michelle. And as you see, I have my lovely guest tonight, Mario Garza, my man, my fiancé of Symbolic Studies.
Here I am.
Hi, Mario. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, me too. I mean, we've both been really pumped about this one as we've been leading up to it. And you've got a lot of interesting things that you want to talk about with Saturn. So
I do. And it's that time of year. And Saturn has kind of played an important role, kind of. I think it's played an important role in our relationship, actually.
I would say that.
Because we've bonded over Saturn over the years, and there's just some new information that's really crystallizing, I suppose, that I'd love to get off my chest. And I know you've been into what I've been sharing, with you as I've been diving into the subject again and everything else. So it made sense to do a show on it.
Yeah, it's brought a lot of light to the darkness of Saturn.
True.
Which is one of the things we've been talking about. And I can't wait for you to divulge this information because when you started telling it to me, I mean, it made a lot of sense. It resonated, and I can see where you're going to be able to fill in some gaps or pull on some new strings, we could say.
Absolutely.
When it comes to talking about Saturn and Capricorn, what Saturn means, its origins, its symbolic significance from a different perspective. So, before we get into it, I want to say hello to everybody out there in the chat. We're probably going to keep the chat off for this one. It's on, so feel free and put comments up, but we'll go through the chat towards the end of the episode. So if you have questions or comments about anything, please feel free and put them up, and then we'll go through it at the end there. Thank you to all the patrons out there. You guys are awesome, and the Patreon community within the Healing Home sphere is growing, so we are both very grateful for that. The support really means a lot, and it really helps us to keep going and help us continue to achieve our goals and to just keep on keeping on with all this information and content and all the great things that we're doing over here in the Pacific Northwest for y'all. So michelleshealinghome.com for anyone who hasn't been there before, or if you're wanting to know anything more about me, my offerings to join the newsletter or the Patreon, you can do that all at the website. And yeah, that's all of you guys are up on the screen now. So thank you to all of you guys, all the recent patrons that have jumped on over. Very grateful.
For sure. Many thanks, guys. We appreciate it, as she mentioned. But yeah, there's a lot to get into with this one. It's a pretty big topic to cover, but I feel prepared. And I was on a show recently. We talked about Saturn, and I had my Capricorn mug. I usually have my Capricorn mug, but there it is. Once again, let's see there. It's in tow. So I think that's going to assist me throughout this whole entire presentation.
Yes, it will indeed. And so I want to first start off with, for people who don't know you, which some people may not know who you are, just give them a little background on Symbolic Studies and yourself and why you got started with Symbolic Studies.
Yeah, sure. So symbolicstudies.com is my website for people who are interested. And Symbolic Studies came out of me, I guess, wanting to share some of the insights that I was getting from my symbolic research. And I've always been a lifelong artist. For people who don't know, I've been a graphic designer for 20 plus years now. And that kind of came out of me, just essentially playing around with Photoshop. Before that, I was playing around with, pens and crayons and, things like that. I painted a little bit. And so I've always been very visual. I was always into photography and things like that. And I found design, and that really took me in, and that created essentially a career for me, But at a certain point, I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about maybe some of the colors I was playing with, some of the basic shapes I was playing with. And I didn't realize that you could actually get into symbolism. This was like foreign to me until I came across a book on symbolism, and I opened it up, and I was really kind of taken aback a bit, where I'm like, oh, wow, you can actually just learn about the symbolism of the cat or the symbolism of, whatever, the color blue, something like that. And from there, it was something that I always paid attention to whenever I went to the bookstores. And I just acquired dozens and dozens of symbolic reference books, over the years. And I found that some authors are better than others. There's kind of particular branches of symbolism, I guess you could say, or symbolic awareness that I tended to gravitate towards, over the years. And at a certain point, I found the tarot, and that just really opened me up to want to know more about like esoteric symbolism. And I realized while studying the tarot that I didn't really know as much as I thought I knew. And it's one of these things where everything is symbolic here. So we all kind of have an understanding of what certain things represent and what they kind of mean,
Right.
But there's layers to every single symbol out there. And so it's a deep, deep well, every single symbol. And when I started reading about the tarot, I just realized that I have a lot more to learn. And from there, that really opened me up to mythology and numerology, astrology, things like that. And I kind of figured that if I'm really going to have a strong symbolic foundation, I really need to understand astrology. And not even so much maybe necessarily like the natal chart aspect of it and the mechanics of it, but I wanted to know the myths behind the signs. I wanted to know the animals behind the signs. I wanted to know the objects that are associated with the signs. And so for the last like 4 years, 5 years, I've been following each sign during the sign itself and researching it. So this is my probably like 4th or 5th cycle with Capricorn and Saturn. And it's been a really beautiful study because every single year, usually I get one new wrinkle that was previously kind of like locked or was previously veiled to me. But because I've been doing this exercise, it's amazing to me just the awareness, I guess, of each sign and how it's really grown. And so it's been a beautiful, beautiful thing. And these signs continue just to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And what do you know, this year with Capricorn, I feel like I used the word crystallized earlier, but it's true. It's like there's some things with Capricorn and in particular Saturn that really is coming into focus now, that, previously was a little blurry. I kind of had read certain things about Saturn over the years that, is in line with what we're going to talk about today. But now I see it much more clearly. And now I could actually talk about it too. And so that's been part of the project as well, is like when there's certain things that are worth bringing up, that's usually what I tend to actually want to discuss and write about and make posts about and everything else. And some of the signs take a while for them to really kind of come through. So I would say like Libra for me took a long time to come through. But now that it's here, it's like my awareness of Libra has really taken off this past handful of months. So that's kind of symbolic studies in a nutshell. I usually post information about each sign during the sign itself. And then I kind of have a illustration project kind of associated with all the signs too. So my long-term goal is to illustrate each sign as well and turn them into posters and things like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's awesome. And your, this yearly cycle, this yearly research project you've had, the way it's kind of come about has been so organic, and it's to me a testament to your ability to understand these symbols and to be open to new things that come through and not always be staunch about what you have learned in the past.
Right.
And being open enough to be like, well, maybe it's not what I thought it was.
Right.
And I think that's one of the healthiest outlooks you can have on life in general. But I feel particularly when you're researching specific anything, to be able to be open to knowing that, hey, it might actually not be what you thought it was, or it might be kind of what you thought it was, but there's this whole other thing that you didn't know or you weren't ready for, as we were talking about off air. And it's that classic, it's the classic saying of when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Right.
And that is how this has been going for you.
Oh, definitely.
And I think it's really cool. And so here we are.
And it's kind of interesting now that I think about it. We were part of the truth community, for a number of years before we even decided to turn on a camera or go online and like be public with anything.
Yeah.
And because we had that experience, I'm used to being wrong. I'm used to assuming
Right.
certain things about the world and realizing that I had it completely backwards.
Right.
And also, we've been used to kind of acknowledging that we live in an inverted reality of sorts,
Yes.
and that things are pretty much upside down, or whatever you might want to say. And I don't even necessarily look at that as a bad thing. But I've been used to being proven wrong so many times where I'm like, oh man, I thought that that was true. That's not true. I thought this was true. That's not true either. And with my symbolic sort of studies here, I kind of take that same, I guess that what I've learned from that sort of time in our life.
Yeah.
And I kind of associate that with symbolism now, where it's just like, hey, dude, you thought you were right beforehand. It's like there's always room for improvement. There's always new veils to be lifted. There's new things to be revealed all the time. And so I try and keep an open mind about all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's one of these things where you just have to be willing to entertain new information, not necessarily buy it. But now I feel like I have a really good sort of gut instinct about where certain signs are going, or certain symbols, what they actually mean, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so Saturn, this is a perfect example to talk about this inversion, this sort of flip with everything, and how, unfortunately, a lot of people have an idea, a concrete idea of what Saturn represents. And I think that there is room for growth there. There's room for kind of a new understanding. And there's a history here. So Saturn, essentially, the symbolism that most people associate with it, obviously, and I've made videos about this stuff, and it's a common understanding. But the main correspondences with Saturn, right? The color black, right? The metal, yep, there it is. The metal lead, right?
Yes. Right. Heavy.
It's dense, it's heavy, it's somber, it's cold, it's lumbering. All of these different types of things. That's not inaccurate. That's true, right? That makes a lot of sense. But that wasn't always what Saturn represented. And basically, that's what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. I mean, this is great. And I love where we're going already. So let's just jump in. And I want to ask you, basically, what is it about Saturn this go around that's got you really excited and basically wanting to get more of this information out?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of things. One, my awareness of the symbolic landscape of who is actually worth reading is evolving and it's changing. And so as I continue to do this project and continue to read, me, I enjoy a book. I enjoy a good book. And so because I've started putting out information online, one of the greatest benefits of doing that has been people's recommendations. You should read this, you should read that. Because I am also teaching students too, I've had so many opportunities to talk about, as an example, like the tarot cards, and different signs and planets and things like that. People come to me now and they want to have a session and they want to talk about a tarot card that they're really interested in. And so I have that chance to be able to really dive deep. And so I've recommended books to people over the years, and I've said you should really read, or if you're gonna have one symbolic dictionary, this is the book you should have. The entries are fantastic. It was put together by a team of people. But the most important thing to me is that they have an understanding of what I might call old world symbolism. So they have an understanding of what ancients used to see within a symbol. And that's why I recommend it, because a lot of new books don't have that kind of awareness. They don't have that kind of scope in mind. This book does. And so I've always been interested in that particular book because of that. And there are certain entries that you're going to read in that book where they just go a little bit deeper and they have a little bit broader of a perspective, I think, over certain symbols. Well, it turns out one of the symbologists that really influenced the writers of that book was a guy named René Guénon. And so I've heard about René Guénon over the years, and I've always underlined his name and highlighted it and was like, okay, René Guénon, I need to finally like look into him. I need to finally like read his stuff instead of reading people talk about his stuff. And so even a book that I'm interested in right now that you got me actually a little while ago, that author, he references René Guénon. As I've been talking about polar symbolism, northern symbolism over the last, year or so, René Guénon has kind of come up a little bit more. And because he talks about some of that symbolism. And so I kind of made it a point recently to finally dive into his work. And I am like very impressed. And so this guy was born in the late 1800s, and he is a philosopher. He was a French guy. He converted to Islam, and he wrote a handful of books. And so I have to shout out at least the current book that I'm reading right now. Right here. So René Guénon, Fundamental Symbols, the Universal Language of Sacred Science. And I just have to say, for my money, for what I'm interested in, he's just checking all of the boxes. And I'm like, okay, this guy is incredibly intelligent, and he has, like I said, he kind of has a old world understanding of symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to go to a more primordial sort of place with basic symbols, the cross, the circle, the dot, things like that. And he has that kind of nuts and bolts foundational sort of understanding of these symbols. And he attributes a lot of basic symbols to the world axis. And not many authors talk about it like openly and plainly. And so I'm on a hunt right now. Any author who is talking about the polar tradition, is talking about the world axis, the northern tradition, he refers to it as the primordial tradition, but it's the same tradition.
Right.
Any author who's talking about this stuff, I'm interested. I want to buy their books. I want to read it just to see what their perspective is.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's been on my radar because of that. And he is delivering the goods. And I've been really just impressed with how he writes. I've been impressed with his analysis of symbolism and everything else. And he's just right up my alley. And so he has things in that book in particular about Saturn and about Saturnalia and what it represents and what it means. And so I would say that he is a big influence on me right now. But what I've realized is that because of the works that I've been gravitating towards, I've kind of been reading his work just throughout the years anyway.
Right, unbeknownst to you.
Yeah,
You didn't.
unbeknownst, yes.
Right, unbeknownst. Sorry.
No,
Yes.
you're good.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, exactly. So unbeknownst to me, I've been a student of René Guénon, and unbeknownst perhaps to some other people out there, if you're interested in symbolism, there's a good chance that your favorite either author or symbologist or whatever is aware of his work and was influenced by his work. And I'm really fortunate too to know people who got into him from other avenues, not necessarily symbolism, because he's written a lot about religion and spirituality and philosophy and stuff like that. He's a prolific writer. But I've talked to other people who have a greater understanding of his full body of work than I do. And, they have, very good things to say about him and everything else. So he has basically, with his work, essentially, kind of cutting to the chase. But it seems as though Saturn, which I've heard this before, but now it's really starting to become like a visible kind of like concrete thing that I can kind of grasp at. Whereas beforehand, I probably could have just repeated these words, but they didn't mean as much to me. But essentially, it seems as though Saturn was the main planet of reverence during a golden age. And that Saturn, as we know it today, that this is all the symbolism that I mentioned earlier, the color black, the somberness, the heaviness, Saturn eating his children, all of these different types of things, that really is a fall from grace for Saturn. And that this wasn't Saturn's sort of associations early on.
Okay.
And so when Guénon talks about Saturn ruling the golden age, this golden age, he also refers to as the Hyperborean age or the primordial tradition, which if people have been following my work, you'll know that this basically relates to polar symbolism, which he also calls axial symbolism, which I was even calling it axial symbolism before I realized that he also called it axial symbolism, because that's what polar symbolism is all about. So just to recap briefly about that for people who are unaware. So it seems as though humanity, has lived through several major symbolic ages. We currently live in a solar age. This was preceded by a lunar age, which was preceded by a polar age. And the polar age, it's obvious with the solar age, what's the main sort of luminary, right? It would be the sun.
Right.
The lunar age, what's the main luminary? It would be the moon. Well, what does that mean for the polar age? Well, it's the pole star. It's the star of stars, in my opinion. It's Polaris. It's the North Star. And so the fixed stars during the primordial age were of more significance, right? They were more important. And so people were more so fixated on the northern sky because there was one star in the heavens that everything revolved around, excluding the wandering stars, which would be the planets. But all of these stars revolve around one point in the heavens, and that would be the pole star. So it was the hub of the wheel of heaven, essentially. This is related to the idea of, people who follow my work know that this is just me kind of repeating myself. But people have said many times over that there is a true stairway to heaven, and it goes to the north. There's a lot of cultures who believe that your soul ascends to the north upon death, that the northern sky is the opening to other realms of existence, to other planes. And when you look at the mythology, it makes so much sense that this has legs to it. There's actual meat here.
Right.
And so over time, there has been a major great shift from polar symbolism, an understanding of the deities that are associated with this. So there are polar deities. I would say, too, having an understanding of what I refer to as living in a polar system, to now living in a solar system, in a solarized world. And so that's been the great shift over the ages from polar to solar. And so when this happened, people's perspectives changed, people's spiritual awareness changed. The center that people focused on also changed. So there was actually literally a pole shift away from this sacred center. So again, when I refer to the polar tradition, the northern tradition, the primordial tradition, I would even say by extension, I've said this before as well, the Typhonian tradition, the Sabian tradition, the Draconian tradition. It turns out that these are all the same traditions. It's just the old tradition. And the old tradition was way more about this sacred center sort of concept. And there's a relationship, I would say, with the center of the heavens being the pole star, the center of Earth, which would be the North Pole, and then also the center of self, which would be your true north.
Right.
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 And so, modern man, the concept of a center, or the concept of a sacred center, is like lost. And Guénon talks about that too. And that the Western world in particular too, these ideas either for whatever reason never translated over. But when you go further east, there's more overt polar symbolism. So the swastika is a polar symbol. It's Ursa Major going around the pole star. The wheel is a polar symbol. There's the mandala is a polar symbol. It's a sacred center symbol. The most important aspect of the mandala is that center point in the middle.
The Taurus field.
The Taurus field. Yeah, exactly. So it's everywhere, but it's out of people's kind of like consciousness and awareness, right? So it seems as though symbolically Saturn was associated with this age, with this primordial polar age. And so he was associated, or this planet was associated with this sacred center, with the center. And this gets into world axis symbolism. So this bridge or this stairway from the northern portion of Earth to the northern sky, this has been called the world axis or the axis mundi. And so when you see a tower, when you see an obelisk, when you see a tree, when you see a mountain, when you see a ladder, there's so many examples, a lance or a sword. These are world axis symbols. And so Guénon talks about it openly that way, which is why I'm like really digging his stuff, because the authors that have a clear understanding of this are far and few between, at least in the modern world. And just to be clear too, I've read books before him that clearly talk about it this way too, about all of these different things being world axis symbols. The other author I'm thinking of, his name is John O'Neill, and he wrote a couple of books called The Night of the Gods. And so I've talked about his material before, but that is where it's at. Polar wisdom is the wisdom of the ages. And so Saturn was associated with that. And even, people like Kenneth Grant have mentioned this. It's out there. You have to really be, interested in the information to kind of like get some of these gems and pull them out of some of this material. But I believe it was either Kenneth Grant or Guénon talking about the fact that at one point, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, because they look very similar, there's 7 stars to Ursa Major, 7 stars to Ursa Minor. Saturn, under the traditional system, was the 7th planet. So it was the furthest planet out, right? And so it was said, and I have it highlighted in some of my material, that there was an understanding that Ursa Major, to some people, which there have been many correspondences for Ursa Major over time, and this is kind of an interesting thread too, is that it seems as though people had more of a very local reference to the 7 stars in the northern sky. So they've been called the 7 stars of enlightenment, and they've been referred to as, plows, wagons. They've been seen as like fish, reindeer,
dippers, vessels.
Yeah, the thigh of a bull. It kind of goes on and on. A newer reference that I've picked up while doing this research is actually the sickle. It's a whole weave to unpack, to be honest with you, but Set and Typhon, and not necessarily the Greek Typhon, but Set and Typhon have a very potent storyline and series of myths that relate to the northern sky. And he includes both of them as corresponding with Saturn. And so these deities that associate with the northern sky, from what I can understand, these are the more primordial gods. So the oldest gods that you're going to come across are associated with the northern sky. In today's world, obviously, I love astrology, but we're dealing with the path of the sun. We're dealing with the ecliptic, right? Those are the constellations we're talking about. So any of the 12 or 13 signs, they're along essentially the path of the sun. That's a later reverence. That's actually more of a modern reverence. As old as it is, it's not as old as deities that were associated with the northern sky. And so there's that whole correspondence. And so Saturn really relates to this primordial older god. And there's a lot of myths that actually pretty much overtly talk about this, that Saturn is an old god, which is why we associate him now with being an old man.
Right.
Father Time.
Right.
Having that scythe, having that white beard and everything. And so symbolically, I see what's being said, but this wasn't always the case, in my opinion. I'm starting to have that kind of understanding that this actually wasn't always the case, and we can unpack some of that, during this conversation here. But those are a few thoughts off the top of my head regarding some of that stuff based on your question originally. But
yeah,
there you go.
Well, this is a really great place to start, and you did a good job of just kind of giving a little bit of a background of where you're coming from too, for people that maybe haven't heard you speak of this before. And the first thing that came to my mind when you started talking about this and told me about the primordial tradition and the connection to Saturn, right away, my mind goes to the wise woman tradition, the folk tradition of healing. And for anyone who missed our episode on the 3 healing and symbolic traditions, you can find that here on the Healing Home. We did a whole episode basically bringing those three traditions and comparing them. So the three traditions of healing and the three traditions of symbolism, and linking them together, and how actually closely knit they really are.
Yeah, right.
And so when you brought this up, thinking about it from that perspective, the primordial tradition, wise woman tradition, when you said it has its roots in Saturn, or Saturn basically is the ruler of this tradition, it totally like made so much sense to me.
Yeah.
And clicked in so many levels. For anyone who has studied the wise woman tradition or the folk tradition could easily see how this is basically totally related.
Yeah.
You know, because we're talking about the basis of healing. I think of root medicine right away. I think of the void. I think of blackness. I think of primordial mother. I think of the natural instinct of a woman to be a medicine woman, to be a healer, to form herself into a crone, to have that journey. And that to me all aligns so perfectly with Saturn and the lessons that come within this, and how the wise woman tradition is more about taking responsibility for your own health and then helping others to do the same. So it is all about self. It's all about lessons. It's all about experience. And anybody who is in that field of healing understands that you learn the most when you go through something.
Right.
You learn the most that you can impart on someone else when you've gone through the ailment, and then you figure out some of the ways to you know, find workarounds with it or to heal it, and then you can pass that on. And so to me, I really want to talk about that a little bit and get your perspective on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because that's a really, really interesting weave.
Yeah, so back to the sickle. I think the sickle will help us kind of like get a clear understanding of this. So I just said that Ursa Major was once viewed as a sickle. And so it's interesting. There's actually a lot of blade symbolism that I found associated with Ursa Major. And so you can almost envision two blades going around the pole star. And so this would be where a lot of circumambulation rituals come from. So there's a lot of rituals around the world where people are going around, spiraling around, revolving around a central point of pivot. Right, the central axis. And you'll see this from native cultures to like, you know, some of the biggest religions in the world where they have this idea. So just very quickly, I think of like the various Native American groups that go around, you know, the First Nations.
I'm not sure.
Going around Central Fire, right? So dancing around a Central Fire. And so that I've read has literally been a reference, openly acknowledged reference of the stars of Ursa Major, or the fixed stars rather, going around this central point of pivot, right? That they're emulating the night sky when this occurs. I'll bring it up later on probably again, but the Kaaba cube in Mecca, going to Mecca, going around, circumambulating the Kaaba cube 7 times. There's the number 7 again. This comes up all the time.
Right.
Or even the Tefillin ritual in Judaism. So wrapping your arm with this black leather strap 7 times. That's the traditional number. You can do less, you can do more, but 7 is what I've read as like that's the traditional amount of times you want to wrap your arm with this black leather strap. And so this is a thing going around this central axis. Like this is one of the oldest rituals you can kind of find, basically, in my opinion. And it mirrors the northern sky. It mirrors the stars going around the pole star. Okay, so if Ursa Major is a sickle, it means that there's a sickle going around the pole star. Woman has always been associated with the blade. That arguably, it's really interesting that this could be perhaps another inversion. I don't know. But, you know, today when you look at blade symbolism, it's really easy to think, oh, well, that's a symbolic reference to like, it's like a phallic symbol. It splits, it divides, it it penetrates, it pierces, so it breaks things, it severs things from itself, right? Well, an old world understanding of blade symbolism is that it actually heavily, very strongly relates to the feminine, and that woman has been thought of as being split because of her genitalia, that there's like an opening in her body, a split, right? So almost like she got cut,
Right.
There's older myths about like Tiamat, as an example, being cut in half, and that we exist or we live within the body of Tiamat, right? And sometimes it is associated that the thing that splits woman is more masculine. But woman has been associated with the blade, even as someone who is like domestic and interested in, creating things and things like that. You need to have a good knife.
Yes.
Right. And so you need
Crucial.
you need to have a good knife. If you're going to be a gardener, if you're going to be a cook, if you're going to like have a home and be domestic, you need to have a good blade. Right. And so the blade is very important. There's a reason why Lady Justice holds a knife or holds a sword, rather. And so she generally holds one sword in one hand, and then she holds the scales in the other hand. This is the 7th sign of the zodiac, so there's the number 7 again. And then Libra's even, Saturn is exalted in Libra as well, which I think is interesting. One of the breakdowns that I did with the Justice card and Libra is that it's very interesting that a lot of decks, it's super subtle, but it's there. A lot of decks will show Lady Justice, and she's wearing her sort of gown, but her legs are noticeably open.
Ah.
Okay.
Okay.
So this openness relates to this split sort of idea, right? That the sword corresponds with. The sword divides things. And so even for me, I associate the 4 mathematical functions with the 4 elements. And so addition would be earth, multiplication would be fire, subtraction would be water, and division would be air. So we're dealing with air symbolism as it relates to the sword. So it's this division sort of concept is actually, there's a feminine aspect there, this splitting from the 1 into the 2. And so showing her legs being open and split, it's implying symbolism that relates to the blade, in my opinion. It's implying symbolism that relates to the sword. And so if people are interested in that, I've done 2 shows about Libra and how Libra relates to the world axis, right? And so it turns out the world axis, with its, all symbols that associate with it, the sword is a very, very potent symbol that relates to the world axis. And actually, my claim in some of these Libra videos is that the scales of Libra it's actually a world axis symbol. That the vertical axis of the scales is what allows the whole function to even operate. It allows the whole entire system to operate and actually be functional, right? So you need that vertical axis in order to have that point of pivot, in order to weigh the scales, right? So again, on the Justice card, you usually see a figure, Lady Justice. She's usually in between 2 pillars, so she is the central pillar, right? She has that sword. That's another central pillar, world axis symbol. She's holding the scales. That's another world axis symbol, in my opinion. The reason why so many symbols go back to the world axis and go back to the center is because, in my personal opinion, everything comes from the center and returns to the center, not unlike a torus field. Right. So that's just like the basic symbolism. If you get into center symbolism, that's what you're going to find. That everything is expressed from one place, but it also returns to the same place, right? And so so the blade relates to, in a more esoteric, veiled sort of way, it relates to the divine feminine, actually. So the sickle being up in the northern sky, to me, relates to this sort of concept. And there's a lot to be said about kind of the primordial goddess being associated with the northern sky as well. And she's sometimes referred to as the creatrix, and she is associated with these 7 stars. And basically, in the northern sky, there's a lot of god symbolism, but there's a lot of goddess symbolism as well. And I'm kind of inclined to think now that earlier on, it was more so related to the feminine, actually. And then later on became more so associated with the masculine. And I think that the symbolism with the scythe and with Saturn, basically the same thing. That earlier on, this is more of a feminine planet, and this was more of a feminine tool. But now later on in the modern world, you generally associate the scythe with Saturn and the sickle with Saturn, and the sickle and the scythe being used to harvest like souls or people. So you tend to have these more negative, heavier associations with the sickle and with Saturn, but it appears as though that wasn't always the case. And then I also just want to say that one of the glyphs for Saturn is basically a sickle, But when you really get into it, the sickle was more of a primordial feminine, dark mother attribute than it was more of a masculine thing. So I think that kind of completes the picture a little bit, perhaps.
Yeah.
More so. Because your main question was
basically it relating to the primordial and wise woman tradition and how
right.
How that all ties in, which to me makes a lot of sense. And I'll say I don't find the symbolism of the harvesting of souls to be a negative thing, because and to me it makes sense that would be more feminine, because she is the creator. Obviously you need man and woman to create a
right.
life. But in these old myths about, immaculate conception, virgin births, and how this whole realm possibly was created, to me it makes perfect sense that it would be scythes that are seen in the northern sky rotating, and they are harvesting souls. But while souls are being harvested, they're being created. So there's that back and forth, that balance, that beautiful balance that always happens and has to happen in order for things to run smoothly here, in my opinion. And so that's one of the things I wrote down. And I love your connection with the blood, because that too makes a lot of sense, and also just further proves this connection with the primordial wise woman folk tradition as well.
Right. Yeah.
Because blood being the mysteries, there's like mystery held there. There's life information held there, all the things that we know about blood. But to me, I think that it's a beautiful representation when you think about the scythes and a blade turning up in the heavens.
Right.
Yeah,
no, I think so too.
Especially, sorry, if this is what you've been researching and what we've heard of many other people say, if the north is the way out. If we do ascend to the north upon death, if you choose to, that is the way out, that this is the exit route, it would make sense to me that is the harvest. That's the harvest time up there,
Right.
when you are leaving. So
two other things real quick. One, when we're talking about death, I automatically think of the death card.
Mm-hmm.
And death associates with Scorpio, which is a well-known, deeply feminine sign.
Yes.
Right. So there's that. And one of the deepest signs in all of astrology as well. Also, as it relates to the scythe and it relates to blood, the same glyph that I was talking about earlier that looks like a sickle, that means Saturn, also has an embedded 5 in it. You might, if you visualize it, you might know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah,
right?
I know which one you're talking about.
So the 5 itself kind of looks like a sickle. And especially with that Saturn glyph, the 5 is right there. It's very obvious.
Right.
And 5 relates to menstruation, because that's the average days of a menstrual cycle.
Right.
So, and then 5 being this number that what I always say is that it exists between the physical and the metaphysical. It exists between the spiritual and the material. And so the number 5 is a deeply spiritual number. The sacred geometry associated with the 5 is like mind-blowing. There's a reason why we have 5 fingers and 5 main appendages. There's a reason why we have 5 elements, right? And the 5th element would be spirit itself. And so it seems as though when we went from this polar age to the solar age, another sort of correspondence with all of this, seemingly, in my opinion, is going from the feminine to the masculine, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Going from more of a understanding that the goddess has its place, has its role, that the color black being associated with the goddess, being associated with the mysteries, and that good things come from the dark.
Yeah.
And so you have to sow a seed and put it into the ground in order for it to germinate and grow. Obviously, when it comes to child birth and everything else, it's like, the embryo grows in the womb, in the darkness of things, and then it comes to the realm of light, if you will. And so, so nowadays, when we think of a lot of these heavier sort of symbols, if maybe if you didn't do your research or you didn't know any better or whatever, you would just think, oh, well, that's very Saturnian, and Saturn's an old man, and so this must be old man symbolism. And it's like, it is, but it wasn't always the case. It was different.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about Saturnalia real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
And so basically, one of the things that I've repeatedly read about Saturnalia is that there's an inversion, and that slaves will turn into masters and masters will turn into slaves for a period of time. And that literally, like, people who were prisoners would be partying with like people who were like maybe higher up the pecking order. And that it was kind of this time of inversion. So things were kind of like flipped upside down. Things were kind of twisted and kind of chaotic and everything else. And according to Guénon, what he says is that it is literally an inversion. It is part of the fall from grace that Saturn went through. And that it's symbolic, he says, of Saturn's awareness being flipped inside out as well. And that we associate kind of this chaotic nature. And I know when I say Saturnalia too, it's I understand that there's a sort of deep well here, and that there's many layers and expressions to this holiday, and it's evolved over time, and there's different regions that had different practices of what they did and everything else. But there's a very debaucherous, obviously, aspect of Saturnalia.
Yes.
With what people are up to, what they were getting in on, and all that kind of stuff. But he makes it very clear that this is a representation of Saturn's fall, essentially. That's why things are inverted. And, his golden age persona, or their golden age persona or essence or whatever, is kind of being, in a way, it's almost like his good name is almost being kind of like dragged through the mud with these rituals and this kind of participation. That the reason why Saturnalia and this inversion kind of chaos exists is because of that fall. And so I thought that was very, very interesting, basically. And that it seems like there's something to that, I would say.
Yeah.
And so Saturn wasn't always viewed in this kind of light. This is a more modern sort of idea, but to people like us living in 2024 now, we look at something like Saturnalia, and if people were being debaucherous and everything else, I don't know, I guess part of me for a long time has always been like, oh, well, that's just like what people do, and it's just how they decided to like let loose and let off some steam and everything else. It didn't necessarily occur to me that this is a symptom of a golden age having fallen.
Yeah.
That's more so what it is, actually, according to Guénon.
It makes so much sense. And when you started talking about the inversion of all this stuff, and as we've talked about and known for many years, we live in the land of inversions. we live in upside down world, clown world, whatever the hell you want to call it. The inversions here are staggering. And so when we look at it from this perspective and just ask the question of, well, is it possible that this stuff has been inverted? Yeah, because it is, in my opinion, because almost nothing is safe from being inverted here when you look at it from a mainstream perspective. They will invert everything that they can to throw people off and to make them think one thing. So when I think about it, it's, if this is the case for Saturn, what does that mean for all the other celestial bodies and
right.
planets and traditions that go along with it? It's all up for question. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad that we have thought this one way or that it is this one way. It's just that, again, and like we said in the beginning, to be open to the possibility that this is how it has been and it's been inverted for us to be thrown off, so that we're not within our primordial tradition, so that we aren't centered and grounded, because that is one of the most important things. And we've talked about that so much. And as we continue to move on through the ages and these years, I see society becoming less and less grounded, and we're given more and more things to keep us ungrounded.
Right.
So it would also be an important time for this information to start coming through, so that we can kind of cycle back to these golden ages, this time of a more golden age where this stuff was more solid and represented in its real form.
Right. I just had an excellent conversation with Robert Phoenix.
Yeah, you did.
He's an astrologer. You can see it on my channel, or you can see it on his channel. And he blew my mind a couple times. And he brought up this idea of, because we talked about a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
And so he brought up the question, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of like, okay, so if we live in a solarized world, you know, what are people going to think about the sun in the future?
It's a good question.
You know, is there going to be a fall from grace with the sun?
Mm-hmm.
And in his last stream, he was talking about it, and I've noticed this too. But you know, the sun, you could almost see that there is starting to be like a pushback, or there's almost starting to be whatever. If you want to call it predictive programming or something else, feel free. But essentially, that the sun, in a lot of ways too, has been weaponized as of late, kind of against us. You know, I'm thinking of like the grand solar minimum. I'm thinking of like solar flares.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of things that are kind of there that actually make sense with the sun maybe perhaps at some point falling out of favor, you know, essentially. And that this is the cycle of these planets, and this is the cycle of these signs, and this is the cycle of symbolism, is that just because you have one impression of a symbol or an animal or something like that, that doesn't mean that that's always been what it's represented, and it doesn't mean that it's always been looked at and viewed that way. I would say kind of like a clear, another example that's kind of clearer to me that's like this is cow symbolism. Cow symbolism, you know, when I think of Taurus, I now think of more feminine symbolism. It's ruled by Venus. I think of the sacred cow, and I think of the cow giving so much and asking so little in return, just like a mother, right? So from the milk to, you know, its hide to its meat to like everything, that was its old understanding of things. And so to me, Taurus was more of a feminine cow. At some point, either the age of Taurus came and gone, something happened, but the cow basically kind of turned into the bull and became a sacrificial animal. And so this is the thing, is that the cycle is something that's revered and put up on a pedestal and perhaps associated with a particular age. When that age passes, the symbolism gets inverted.
Ah, right.
The symbolism flips and the symbolism changes. And so this has happened many times over. And so this has even happened with deities that I refer to as like polar deities, polar gods, that they were associated with the north. They were associated with this Hyperborean sort of concept, this earlier age. And then over time, they now have been associated more so with the sun. And so now, you know me, I mean, over the last handful of years, one of the things that I wouldn't say it necessarily drives me nuts, but I see it all over the place, that so many people associate everything with the sun. And that's a modern idea. That's more of a modern sort of construct. A lot of symbolism that is associated with the sun, like the circle with the dot in it, you know, the solar glyph, I don't think it was always associated as a solar symbol. I think that there was a lot of symbols that were associated with other things back in the day. And now, because we live in the solarized world, now everyone just associates everything with the sun.
Right. Well, and you talking about the sun perhaps falling out of favor or what have you, if you look at it on more of a physical level too, and if you subscribe to the theory of them making weather and spraying chemtrails, what are they physically doing with that? They're literally blocking out the sun.
Right.
So are they is there some sort of conditioning happening on there's conditioning on multiple levels with that, in my opinion. And I don't think it's a theory. I think that they're actually doing it, but it's like when you think about it from that perspective, they're literally physically doing that in our world, like actively. So what on a subconscious level are they trying to implant in us when they do that as well?
Right.
Not only are they who knows what's going on with it really, and I don't pretend to understand, but to me it's a very deep seated sort of thing that's happening there, and that's the first thing I thought of when you talk about that. So I think that there's something to be thought on when it comes to that as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. If we just sat down with a piece of paper and started thinking about it, there's probably all sorts of things that we would pick up that are kind of in line with this general sort of idea.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. Things just change. Things change over time. So things evolve, things grow, people change, their opinions change.
Hopefully.
And so it just seems like with symbolism, that's what makes it kind of tricky, I think, for some people, is that, wait, I'm reading over here that it means this, but I'm reading over here that it means that, and then also this. And then you might have your own opinions about what it might represent, and so it sometimes it's kind of hard to integrate some of this information, so it sometimes too, it takes me a long time to finally come out and talk about stuff like this, because I don't think I've really expressed a lot of this stuff to people. It's more of a new wrinkle as we're kind of talking about. So, but it seems as though that it just makes all the sense in the world. I'll say that another thing that makes me think that this is the case, this golden age, Hyperborean age, Saturnian correspondence, it makes so much sense. I mean, just to look at the devil card, the traditional devil card. It's not uncommon, which is ruled or corresponds with Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, right? It's not uncommon for the devil to be on a pedestal. And I love the Rider-Waite version because he's on a black monolith, essentially. And so he's literally on a monolith, like the monolith from like 2001, A Space Odyssey. And so he, just by standing on the monolith, he, to me, is associating himself with the polar age because he's associating himself with a polar axis symbol. And the devil card, the modern devil card, borrows a lot from Baphomet. And Baphomet has a pole in his lap, which is basically his penis. Sometimes they actually show Baphomet with a penis, but he has that pole. And then oftentimes there's, like, I think the main Eliphas Levi Baphomet illustration, there's the twin serpents going up that pole, just like a caduceus. Right. I've talked about it in my Libra axis videos. This is a world axis. It's the world axis in his lap. And then there's a dome over that phallus. There's a dome over that pole. So this is the world axis, and the dome is the firmament, essentially, right?
Right.
And so the devil is associated with the world axis, and with the cube. This is like a known correspondence, this black cube. The black cube, to me, is a symbolic representation of the world axis, or symbolic representation of this sacred center. And so the sort of substitute symbol for a black cube would just be the stone. And so the stone relates to Saturn symbolism like all day long, just the heaviness of a stone and everything else. And so this central stone is no different than a central mountain. And goats are known for climbing the mountain, so we're talking about goat symbolism. So even in some of the symbolism that's obviously related to Saturn and Capricorn, the sea goat, that's what the goat is known for. The goat is known for ascending that mountain. You will see a very proud goat on top of a mountain in Geoffrey Boschart's Capricorn illustration, right? So the goat has this ascension concept related to it.
Right.
The same way the sacred center has this ascension concept related to it. And so, again, Mecca, the black cube, right? It's because that's their sacred center. So it might as well, I would never say that they obviously should change it or anything, but it might as well be a world tree. It might as well be a standing stone. It might as well be literally a central stone that they circumambulate around, because that's what they're doing. They're mirroring the heavens once again. And in 2001 A Space Odyssey, you will see this classic alignment more than once of the sun, the moon, and the monolith, right? These are the three ages. It's talking about the solar age, it's talking about the lunar age, and it's talking about the primordial age. It's talking about the polar age, or the northern tradition, basically. So when you see that alignment in 2001 A Space Odyssey, it's talking about these three major symbolic ages, in my opinion. And so yeah, that's something that I actually probably want to do a presentation on at some point. So the devil being associated with the world axis makes all of the sense in the world, in my opinion. But the devil being associated with the world axis might be more of a modern sort of construct of, again, just associating Capricorn and Saturn with this heavy sort of evil kind of notion, I guess you can say.
Right.
Even though I don't really, I don't know. I don't, when I think of the devil, I don't even think of anything evil. I think of something that's necessary.
Right. Yeah. I would say the same thing. And I think that there's like misconceptions all around that kind of stuff.
I think of my inner devil.
Right.
I think of the demons within.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
So another way of putting this would be a lot of gods, when their age has transitioned and it's over, they turn into demons.
Right.
So I think that that's what we're seeing with Saturn, is that its demonic side, its darker side, is what kind of permeates his symbolic sort of right now, but not this golden, lighter sort of side or its feminine side, I would say.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can interject here,
Please.
I've got
this is your show.
Well, right, but you are the guest, my good sir. And this is, I'm so glad we're doing this episode. Okay, so one of the things that came to my mind when I was writing questions out and thoughts for today, now this goes back to what you talked about with the devil card, his phallus or the pole and the dome being around it. One of the thoughts I had was, so perhaps Saturn had to be the primordial sign or that primordial element in the creation of this place in order to establish the boundary that is the firmament. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And so that came to me and I wrote it down, and, boundaries are super important, obviously. Mm-hmm. And so I think that boundaries would be the basis almost of this place, that it would be a primordial lesson that you would need to have instilled in you, that boundaries are important. And the foundation and fundamentals of creating boundaries, of strengthening boundaries, of knowing when to put up a stronger boundary or to open your boundary or what have you. But that's something that came to mind with that. And then as soon as you said it with the devil card, to me, It made a lot of sense. So want to throw that into the bucket. And then also something that comes to mind is the idea of the monolith and that being representative of the primordial polar age. And what if we are moving back into the polar age? What if we're going through a shift right now and we're heading towards, now this could be hundreds of years down the road and we might be long gone, at least in this form. What if we are on a slow trajectory to the primordial age, polar age, and the monolith, which is the phone, which is the screen, is our little subliminal clue that we're there. Right. And the screens are becoming more prevalent and more necessary and more used and more enamored and more addicted to, and all the things that you want to say about it. Right. Just a thought. Just throwing it in.
So, let me talk about the boundary thing and then hold that thought, because we could talk about that too.
Yeah. And I don't want to throw you off from your points, but
no, this is good.
Okay, cool.
So the boundary thing. So the way I kind of look at it, and I'm a perpetual student. That's one of the reasons why I called it symbolic studies.
Right.
It's like I want to help people with their symbolic journey, but I also want to help myself and continue to do my research and continue to put it out. And like I said, it's like when you put something out, you get so much in return. It's insane.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, because I started Symbolic Studies, I've gained so much from people sending me just different, videos and links and books and all sorts of stuff. And so, but about the boundary thing, so this is how I kind of perceive it. Just like a tree, just like a tree, which we've talked about before. We did a whole episode on the cosmic tree.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about tree rings, right?
Right.
The growth rings of a tree.
Right.
So everybody knows how the growth rings of a tree works, right? And so the oldest ring is going to be the one that's furthest out.
Mm-hmm.
The youngest ring is going to be the one right in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And so that means that when a tree is young and it starts growing additional rings and it starts getting thicker and bigger, that means that the original first ring is going to be the furthest one out, right?
Yeah.
So
right. It comes from the center.
Or just like a ripple,
right?
Right. So you throw a pebble in a pond. Think about stones now, but you throw a pebble in a pond, and then it breaks the surface tension. It creates one ring, and then another ring, and another ring. The first ring, though, that's created is going to be the one that's furthest out and dissipates first, right?
Right.
This symbolism relates to Saturn. It has to relate to Saturn.
It even looks like Saturn.
It does, exactly right. So it looks like Saturn. Saturn has its rings. It's well known for its rings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the symbolism that I get, and Robert Phoenix brought this up too, which I've entertained before. And again, I'm just the perpetual student. So what is actually the case? We can't go back in time and figure it out. But it seems as though Saturn may have been the first planet or the first sun.
Mm-hmm.
Or I've even entertained just the first star. And that there's symbolism relating to Saturn, and this comes from more of like the electric universe side of things. So if people want to do follow-up research, they can look into the electric universe and their kind of like cosmology, I suppose, and what they believed has occurred. I'm becoming more and more open to the idea that what we see and what we call our sky clock has changed over time, and that the wandering planets or the wandering stars, which are the planets, that the system that we have now that most people are used to, maybe this wasn't always the case.
Yeah.
Because some very intelligent people, when I've brought some of this stuff up, it's come up 2 or 3 times now in conversation. This idea that the moon at one point did not exist.
Right.
And that there are myths out there and storylines out there from old cultures that discuss a time where the moon wasn't even visible in the sky. So like, what the hell is up with that? And
Right.
then I know all of the different anomalous, random, mysterious things about the moon too. And that seemingly it doesn't make sense. So, this kind of stretches our imagination a little bit. But there is something to be said about the idea of Saturn being the first. And just like the first ring, therefore it's the oldest. And so it got pushed out over time. And so then it became the furthest planet out. And so do the planets come from a central point? Does it go back to the sacred center idea of everything expressing from and returning to the center? So it seems as though Saturn may have been the first sun, which is interesting because the glyph for the sun, I've said before, is a polar symbol. It represents the central axis and circumambulation revolving around that central point of pivot. But it also looks like Saturn. It looks like Saturn from the top down. You look at Saturn from the top down, it looks like a bullseye. It literally looks like the Target logo,
Right.
So did Saturn occupy a central point, at some point way back when, and got pushed out over time? Is this part of its fall from grace? Is what I'm asking.
Right.
Perhaps that there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
Was it the original sun? I don't know. There's something to be said about that.
I've had hunches about that after doing research, and you could say that, and somebody will right away say, no, it's not. It's like, but how? We don't know.
Right.
We don't know 100%.
Right.
So the option of that being possible, I think, should be definitely considered when talking about this kind of stuff.
So that isn't it interesting that this kind of lines up with what we're trying to say, or what I'm trying to say is
No,
that
totally.
it was related to this polar age, polar axis, world axis, northern symbolism. And then there was a fall from grace, so there was a pole shift. It moved away from this central position and went further out. So there's something to reconcile here, or there's something to kind of integrate with all of this information. So I'm interested in that. And so this relates to your boundary idea, because if it were the first, that means that it's also now conceivably, kind of in a way, the furthest out and the last, which would be the perimeter or the boundaries of this place. So most people know that Saturn is associated with restriction, right? And this is oftentimes brought up in contrast to Jupiter's expansion, right? So when I think of Saturn that way, I think of the walls of a home. I think of the shell of an egg. I think of the firmament, kind of as like what you brought up, in a way. So I think of I think of two things. I think Saturn, and there's a few symbols that are very much aligned with this. There is an undeniable sort of core to Saturn now that I see, like this central sort of idea, but there's also the outer limits as well. I see that as well. And so it seems to have occupied both places at one point, symbolically and maybe literally, in the sky and everything else. So it was once right in the center, and now it's the furthest thing out, right?
Yeah.
And so the serpent, I would say, that's another symbol that I always think about that with. That there's symbolism with the serpent being in the middle, wrapped around a central axis, wrapped around the world tree. But then there's also the idea of the serpent wrapping around everything.
Yeah.
And so and representing the outer limits or the outer bounds of reality, essentially. And so I think Saturn kind of is related to that. And there is some Saturnian serpentine stuff. Not really prepared to talk about, but there's stuff going on there too.
Yeah.
So the boundary thing. Yeah, totally.
It makes sense to me. I mean, in a big way. And the pole shift idea, each time you've said it, and when you've said it before, excuse me, it makes me think about it from a geocentric perspective. That pole shift, when you say pole shift, depending on who you're talking to, they literally think that there's like poles moving and stuff. But what if it is literally, the pole shift is literally just what you're talking about, with it being the shift out of the polar tradition?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so to me, when you say that, I think it's something to be pondered on when we're talking about pole shifts and what that really looks like. And it makes more sense in a geocentric model that it would be more like this, which in turn, to me, makes a lot more sense and helps make sense of everything else in this realm.
Right.
That it is a geocentric model, and this really helps to illustrate that as well.
I think so too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think that almost like the pole shift, David Icke said this, but and I don't think he coined it, but I think he was the first person I ever heard it from. But energy flows where attention goes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is the pole shift sort of idea. It's like the focus of the people.
Yeah.
So if your focus of the people at one point, as an example, is in the home, if it has to do with tradition, if it has to do with your spiritual sort of framework, if it has to do with raising a family and all these different types of things, and then let's just say that's no longer the focus anymore, and it's more so on whatever, entertainment or making money or a million other things that it could be, drugs or whatever your vice might be. That's a pole shift.
Yeah.
That's a fundamental shift away from how people used to live and what people used to kind of aspire to do, or what they consider to be sacred. Now it's no longer that's no longer the case. So just real brief, I've talked about this before too, but it seems as though with the polar tradition, with the northern symbolism aspect of it, that whenever there is a central location that people held in high regard, that it would be indicated with something. Like I've mentioned it, a mound, a tree, an obelisk, a standing stone, a stone, a Kaaba cube. I would say Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock. That's an example of one. But people have had these different sort of like central places of worship. There might be a temple or whatever. In Atlantis, if you follow Plato's Atlantis, it's a concentric ringed reality.
Right.
And there's like a temple in the middle. And so this idea of this place of worship, this holy of holies, it's not uncommon for that central symbol too, or like if it's a central stone, like in Jerusalem, there's a foundation stone underneath the dome of the rock, and there's a hole that goes down to underneath the earth. Essentially, it's like a symbolic of like the abyss. So this holy of holies, again, we're talking about ascension, potential hole, potential gateway, potential portal, right?
Right.
That this holy of holies meant everything to you, and it meant everything to your people. So your family tree was the thing that you basically held with the highest respect you could possibly have, because symbolically it represented your ancestry, it represented your spiritual foundation for everything, right? And so because it's a world axis symbol too, it implies all the things that I'm kind of associating with that. This bridge between heaven and earth, essentially, right? And when that is lost, that is what I've read, is that this is like the end of your spiritual tradition. People would be confused, they would be lost if it got destroyed. They don't know, and maybe there's examples of this, and I could be proven wrong, but the examples I have read of people who lost their spiritual center, that they are like they're no longer the same. That they literally go through a heavy experience where they're just burdened, and they're no longer able to kind of have a focus or an aim or a goal or whatever. And so At the Center of the World, that's a book that I've recommended a number of times. The author, John Michel, he talks about this. He talks about people losing their sacred center and what it does to them psychologically, emotionally, spiritually.
Right.
And obviously it's not good. And so rival tribes and stuff, that was the point. That's what they wanted. They wanted to destroy that family tree. They wanted to destroy that tower or temple or whatever it is, because they knew that that was kind of the sort of head of their whole entire existence. And so if you can cut them off at the head, they don't even know what to do with themselves anymore.
And then they can invade.
Yeah, and then they can invade and
take over
100%.
You know, and all the things which we kind of have seen throughout time and history and current age.
Right. So we are, I would say, modern man, especially Western man. Maybe I'm wrong and it's just the whole globe, you know, or the whole world, rather. Don't want to get in trouble with some people for using the globe word, but it slips through every once in a while. We are people without a pole. That is where we're at. We don't have this concept anymore. We don't have anything that's kind of relatable that way. It's a lost science. It's a lost sort of thing. And so I think in a lot of ways we're people without a pole. So that's why for me personally, with the North Star stuff and the Sacred Center business, I feel like I found my pole now. And I think that it doesn't necessarily need to be a physical pole. It doesn't need to be a physical place of worship, you know, but I have a philosophical or spiritual place of worship. I have a center, you know. And so I feel like I've identified my center through this. And so it's helped me find my true north, right, basically. And so I think that that's one of the greatest shifts, one of the greatest pole shifts, is away from center, is away from self, away from family, away from all of these different things. And so now people don't, you know, they don't have that point of pivot anymore.
Right.
And so we're basically, it's almost like people are, it's like lost souls who are basically kind of out there ready to be kind of picked up and used and abused and chewed up and spit out by whatever industry or whatever personality or whatever sort of force wants to do that to people. Yeah. You know, that's what happens when you don't have a pole, when you don't have that sacred center. Yeah. So people who do have it around the world and they're like, hey, no, we still have this and we believe that this is where we came from. That's often a story that is associated with a lot of people's polar sacred center, is that this is where we came from, you know, and this is what we identify with. And it's oftentimes in people's, like, you know, not literal backyards, but like in their backyard. It's in their region. It's in their village or something along these lines. You know, it's a very healthy thing to have, but every single place of worship like that, if there's a pilgrimage point, the pilgrimage is to that central place, which is mirroring, or is it like a substitute symbol, not in a bad way, but like a substitute symbol for the original sacred center, which would be where the world axis is, basically.
Right. Wow.
So, yeah.
Pretty amazing stuff, bub.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Oh my God, of course. Yes, I love I just love the analogy of the sacred center and the importance of it and knowing your own sacred center. And I think that, these are concepts that we're not taught in school.
Mm-hmm.
You're taught them if you have parents that are aware and they understand this stuff. But when it comes to these sorts of subjects, a lot of times you have to go and seek it out on your own, which is part of finding your own sacred center. And as you said, your true north.
Right.
And I think that the more we talk about this kind of stuff, the more it's going to ping for certain people to be able to do this on their own,
Totally. And I'll say that there's a number of correspondences within self that relates to the sacred center.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say probably the most important, obvious one is the heart.
Yes.
And so it's your heart, that is your sacred center.
Yeah.
That is the center of your torus field. It's where blood gets pumped out of and then also returns to.
Yeah.
So it is toroidal in nature. And that is your sort of antenna to spirit. It's the seat of your spiritual impulse. And so I think that is something worth identifying, is that our spiritual center within is our heart, which makes all the sense in the world.
Oh, yeah.
In my opinion. But that's kind of the relationship I've built with the North Star stuff and everything else, is that when I think about this stuff and I even talk about it or whatever, I always have the heart-centeredness kind of in mind. And that'll lead you to your true north more than anything else, I would say.
It definitely will. It definitely will. And it does all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I think that is something that, needs to be remembered too when you're thinking with your head or whatever. Are you checking in and thinking with your heart as well? And kind of the concept of the third eye, your third eye actually being the heart. And that being a whole other way of looking at it. Not to say we don't have, a third psychic eye in the area of our forehead or what have you, but I do think that there's something to be said about looking at your heart in that respect.
Yeah.
That being your first light, first point of light to go to when you're doing anything in life.
Definitely. And heart is an anagram for earth, and I think that during the primordial Hyperborean northern tradition, the earth was center stage. And that's another correspondence right here too, the earthiness of Saturn.
Yeah.
And so whether it's a man or a woman, but the earthiness of Saturn, it relates directly to this earlier age because people had more of a reference for what was going on locally, what was happening right underneath their feet, what was happening in their own region. In the solar world, you're exporting your thoughts all over the world. You're looking for external validation. You're looking for, you're being sold external problems as well.
Yeah.
By looking so far outside of self. And so to me, this is kind of symbolic or emblematic of like the sun and how the sun has rays that shoot out, right? That's what we're kind of doing now in so many different ways. It's like we're being siphoned off. We're giving our energy all over the place and we never really bring it back home, in a lot of ways. And so I think we can just be taken advantage of that way. So this is the pole shift. So it's like, bring your pole back to self.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important thing you can kind of do is just kind of like stand in your power, acknowledge your own divinity, and all of that kind of stuff and realize and acknowledge just how powerful you truly really are. And all of that. And I think that there is a direct relationship with that and the earth itself, because the earth is terrain. Our physical bodies are terrain.
Exactly.
As well, right?
Exactly.
There's a center to the earth. There's a center to self, physically as well, right? And so I think that that's another sort of thing kind of going on here is during that earlier age, earth-centeredness was a higher priority. Nowadays, everyone is like let's go to Mars. Let's colonize Mars. Let's colonize the moon.
Right.
Let's go to these different planets. Seemingly it's like history. I think one of the conditioning things that we've kind of been sold over time is that history happens everywhere except for where you're at.
Right.
Everything's important and has this sort of I don't know, there's an allure to everywhere except for where you're at right now.
Right.
And that's something that's changing. That's really changing now because a lot of people are looking into the hidden history of their region. So all of like old world Florida, the history of Florida, people looking into the histories of all of these, of this country as an example, because we live here.
Yeah.
So people are realizing, no, wait, there's a way bigger story here.
Yeah.
This isn't just some random suburban sort of town city thing with like no history at all.
Right.
There's a longer arc here. There's more mystery here than what we've been told. And that's what's been sold to us in the solarized world, is that everything, all the important stuff is happening everywhere else. So your head is in the stars. Your head is all over the place. You wish you were anywhere else besides where you're at right now.
Right.
In the primordial northern tradition, my understanding is it was the exact opposite. It was, no, what's happening within your immediate space, that is the most important shit ever.
Right.
And so that's why people had that sacred center local to them, because that was their point of transcendence. They don't have to travel around the world. They don't have to go to all of these distant places or whatever to actually like get in touch and be plugged in with everything.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I see, is that was another flip away from self and where you identify and where you live away, and now you're just giving it away a lot of times, and myself included too. I have a lot of work to do in that regard, but I can kind of see that that's what I've been doing, and I can see that that's how I've kind of been conditioned to think as well,
Yeah.
And so keeping it local, it sounds cheesy, it kind of sounds granola or whatever, but it's a very powerful thing to understand.
Well, yeah, these are great points, and it's one of the most important things to do if you're wanting to be a productive person.
Yeah.
Is to not worry so much about what everybody else is doing or what is going on in some other distant land. Well, meanwhile, you don't even know what's going on right here within you.
Exactly.
And it really takes you out of the productive mindset. It takes you out of just trusting in your own abilities as well, and so Here. I am in favor of all the things you're saying. And obviously we've talked about these things at length for a long time, but these new folds that you've brought with Saturn, in my opinion, it's a home run. I mean, it really brings it ties a lot of things together in a really great way. And I'm not just saying that because everything you've said and me being able to even connect my own dots with it and then have this conversation, it's become even more clear to me that this is possibly what is going on.
Yeah.
But as we said, we still don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that we're definitely open to. And I think it was a great presentation to kind of get it out there for other people to see what they think about it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
And I just looked over my notes and I think I rattled off everything that I wanted to get around to.
Nice.
But yeah, this was fun.
Oh yeah, this is great. I mean, I this is not the last time we're going to talk about this because it's the Earth connection to me and Saturn and Capricorn, and then thinking about how important the cycles of Earth were to people, the seasons,
yes,
the calendar that goes by the seasons instead of what we're given now, how time was actually viewed, how time actually really probably plays more out is within the rhythm of nature. Is within the rhythm of that essence of Saturn and that primordial tradition, which is the wise woman tradition or the folk tradition, which to me just always makes so much more sense because, again, it's all about coming back to the pole. It's coming back to you, and it's on you. It's on you to figure these things out so that you can be better, to help other people be better.
Totally. It's there's, so many more thoughts are coming to me or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's one of these things too, where it's like, you are your own Messiah.
Yeah.
Don't look for an external Messiah, and also don't look for an external scapegoat.
Aha.
So it's like, it's not about scapegoating other people. There's a reason why this is just another potential inversion with all of this, is this idea of a scapegoat. And so the idea of a scapegoat came about from people essentially putting their sins into a goat and then sacrificing the goat. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so so they clean their hands of their own sins.
Right.
It's
all gone. Okay.
Yeah. What a great setup there.
Yeah.
And so there's even more stuff I could talk about with that. That's pretty disturbing. But anyway, so, not externalizing messiahs, not externalizing scapegoats. Regarding time, that's a whole weave we can get into as well, with the scythe and how it relates to time.
Yeah.
And the sickle and how it relates to time, because it kind of represents like one of the things that I've read that I think is interesting is the scythe and the sickle being symbolic of cutting periods of time. And that's kind of one of the things that's been associated with it, that it's related to time itself. Death comes for you, on a white horse. He's oftentimes holding a scythe, or he's just it's a skeleton type figure with a scythe, so it's the harvest of souls thing, but it's also your time is done.
Right.
So
yeah.
it's kind of the end of a cycle of time, right? This scythe.
Yeah.
But the other thing that it reminds me of is that regarding the sickles in the northern sky, Ursa Major, going around the pole star, that was the earliest time clock. I'm pretty convinced of that now. And I've said this many times, but the earlier timekeeper, the earliest sky clock, was Ursa Major going around the pole star. And so to me, what appears to have happened is time and our impression of time has changed, and the main timekeeper, the main sky clock, has changed. So nowadays, when people refer to the sky clock, they're referring to the planets and the planetary movement of everything. Obviously, the sun, and the sun going around once a year along the ecliptic, which is what the signs of the zodiac are on. That's the track they're on. Previous to that, it seems as though the main keeper of time was the moon. So we were in a lunar time sort of period. Makes a lot of sense. There's still groups that follow a lunar cycle. Seems like previous to that, we were in a polar understanding of time, and people were following Ursa Major. They're following the two sickles going around the pole star.
Yeah.
And so that's just another connection with the northern sky, time, the sickles, all that kind of stuff. And then even the scythe too, arguably, you can kind of see a scythe in Ursa Major too, I would say.
Oh yeah, I could see. Yep.
So anyways, that's what I got.
Yeah. That's awesome. This is great.
Yeah.
I love it. And I say keep on keeping on, because this is a really good weave.
Right on.
Yeah. Great strings that you brought out to pull, for sure.
Hell yeah.
Yes.
This was a good time.
Yeah. Thank you to everybody out there hanging out. And let's see. I'm just going to go into the chat and see. We've got quite a few comments coming through, so we probably won't go through everybody's comment. But if anybody did have some kind of, question for Mario or what have you, this would be a good time to put that up there in the chat. So do that if you like. Otherwise, thanks for being here. And I'm seeing some great people in the chat. We got Miri here. What's up, Miri? Artist Seer. We've got Gordy.
What's up, guys? Thanks for hanging out.
Hello, everybody. Got Joshua the Branch and Project Cheney's here as well. Lots of other people. Moonsprout. I'm just going to shout some people out. And see
some new folks.
Yeah, we got some new names, which is awesome. Welcome to the Healing Home. And for our Saturn chat, this is great. PK, how's it going?
Howdy ho, PK.
Super conscientious enthusiast. Awesome. Good to see ya. SW's here. Awesome. Cool. So, well, if nobody has questions, as I said, we probably won't go through all these comments.
Yeah, I think we're good.
But just wanted to say thank you guys for everybody for hanging out. Petra's here as well.
There's one question down below.
Beautiful blooms. All right, we got one question. Let's see what we got. Thunderton's here. All right. Gordy asks, Mario, what broke you of the Messiah thing for yourself?
Oh, not looking for an external Messiah.
I'm assuming, yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I would say probably, yeah. what did break me out of that? I mean, I feel like I've always been pretty independent, you know, as a person generally, and I've kind of been a person that has gone against the grain with a lot of things, and I just felt like people who were looking for an external messiah to help save them, it always seemed it never fit for me. I feel like it's almost, I don't want to say that this has always been like my lifetime sort of thing, but when I look back at my life, I feel as though that has always been the thing. I've always felt like I've needed no one was going to come save me.
Right.
You know, I've kind of always thought that, you know, that I needed to do things on my own accord, and that it was up to me to kind of figure it out. And I would say there was probably some pivotal stories in my youth where I realized that that was the case.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes trauma will kind of assist you along that journey. As difficult as trauma is to endure, you know, there are blessings within all of that, you know? And so I feel as though probably going through some stuff in my childhood made me realize, like, oh shit, no one's coming to save me.
Right.
And then that was probably hard to deal with as a kid, but as I got older, I'm like, oh, actually, that is a good awareness to have, because so many people spend their whole lives looking for that thing or that person or whatever to kind of do that work for them, you know? And so, yeah, I'm gonna have to chew on that one a little bit. Actually, it's an excellent question though.
It is, but knowing you, I would say that that's pretty, you know, that's pretty accurate, because, you know, I even remember early on in our relationship when the way you even talk about musicians or celebrities is different than how a lot of people, myself included, even looked up to musicians in their life.
Yeah.
You always kind of had a very healthy way of knowing that, like, well, they're just normal people. And I can remember us having conversations about that.
Oh, like you would put people on a pedestal.
Yeah. You know, obviously we all have like favorite artists or bands or whatever, but I know for me specifically, as I grew up or even into my adult years, really put people on a pedestal and would have high expectations for people. And then you get let down when you either meet them or whatever happens. There's something that is just like, oh, okay, my perception of you is totally different than what I thought. And then you realize that these people are just like you, but they have special gifts that they share with the world, and it sets them apart from everybody else.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that they have it all figured out and that they are some messiah that wants to even be worshipped.
Right.
You know, and so I think that, you know, in our culture, we're taught from young ages to have these people that we look up to, and then you have religion and how organized religion can cloud these ways of thinking and stuff like that as well.
Right.
So,
That's very true. Real quick, PK has one.
yeah, I saw. All right, here we go. PK. Mario, Michelle, this was great to see you guys. Thank you. Mario, you familiar with any of Steiner's stuff, specifically on Old Saturn, Old Sun, Old Moon?
Steiner is someone that I really need to, by virtue of the fact that, I mean, I've heard so much about Steiner over the years. I've talked to people about Steiner. I've done little dives, I would say, in the shallow end with Steiner. But I have not absorbed, like, by any means, any of his, like, larger works or anything like that. But from everything I've always heard, I really need to get around to it at some point. So in due time, I really do think I'm going to get around to Steiner and kind of just figure it out, because he's one of these people I can tell that I just need to give him his due diligence. And even just for my own personal understanding of why other people really like him so much in his work.
Yeah.
I need to do that. We've even had Steiner books around that we never got around to.
Yeah, we have. And I think we've donated them.
But yeah, man, good question.
Yes. Thank you, PK.
At some point. What's
up, Ben? Good to see ya.
What's up, Ben? Hope you're well.
All right, let's see. Mario, what do you think of Tommy Lee Motley Crue?
Can't say I have too many opinions.
Well, he's a ruffian. He's
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, SW. All right, question from Laguna Taos. New Year Turtle Dance. What pole celebrating ritual resonates most with Mario personally that y'all practice?
I mean, I would say it's more of an ascension versus like it's an ascension. So you just said ritual, not necessarily the circumambulation thing or whatever. But personally, I know earlier I said I don't necessarily have a physical pole or whatever. I think it can change. I think yours can change. I think there's a world where it doesn't necessarily need to be the same everywhere all the time. There's even in that At the Center of the World book by John Michel, he talks about people that have a mobile sacred center pole.
Kind of like a mobile altar.
Yeah, it's like having a mobile altar.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also, like in India, they have several locations that basically align with all of this symbolism. And that this is where they go to for their Kumbh Mela celebration. And so they've been able to kind of like diversify their sacred center. And so they have a different sacred center every 3 or 4 years, but it's the same 3 or 4 locations over around India.
Okay.
And I do want to go to a Kumbh Mela celebration at some point, but I would say, I mean, we have a fondness and a reverence for our local mountain.
Yeah.
And I would say that is what we've personally, or it's what I've identified as our local sacred center that we work with, essentially. And so that would be my answer.
Yeah. I'd also say, too, we have a central tree in the yard.
Yes.
That we concentrate on as such. So, you know, offerings and thoughts and flowers and plants and trees and things in that area kind of go along.
And
with
I
that
even
too.
say, too, they're like networked together. That's
They
how
are.
I view it.
Yeah, it's almost like connected with ley lines kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, in your own way.
But good question.
Okay.
Old World Micmac.
Old World Micmac wants to know if Mario, have you delved deeper into the director's chairs?
I look. That's really funny, man.
That's a good one.
I've looked into it before, actually, and I'm not surprised. If I'm not mistaken, they are more of like a desert design. Like it goes
in warm weather.
Yeah, like more of the Middle East. You know, if I'm not mistaken, that's kind of where their essence, the first designs kind of came from.
Makes sense.
But no, I have not gone deeper. But you're reminding me that I should.
I like that question. What's up, Cheney?
Hey, Cheney.
Do you think Kronos was Crone?
I mean, exactly.
Yes. Like, is Saturn holding masculine space when it should be feminine?
Essentially.
We talked about this morning, actually, Cheney. Yes.
Yeah.
And I would agree. I mean, I think the original Kronos was the crone or is a crone.
Yeah, that might even be a good follow-up episode to do, because there was even stuff that we talked about that we didn't mention today.
Right.
But I would like to look into it a little bit more and do some follow-up research with it. But essentially, basically, yeah, I have zero issues with perceiving it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, just as she just mentioned, Kronos and Crone.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And kind of when you talked about how, the flip from the feminine to the masculine, and then what have you.
So it's I'll just say it's interesting. We have this idea of astrology that like everything fits right now. So there's a planet for this, there's a planet for that, there's a sign for this, there's a sign for that. So everything kind of fits. It's almost like it's a complete system, I guess, in a way. But like these types of things really get my mind going of being like, well, is this, it's not going to be like this forever though, so even when I was talking to Robert Phoenix, I really suggest people check out that chat. I had an awesome time.
Yeah, it was a really good...
we'll do it again. And so I feel like I leveled up just by talking to him, and he's so aware of so many different things with astrology that it was awesome. But he even suggested, as an example, because we're talking about the moon, he's like, okay, cool. He's like, so if the moon is bullshit or it's not part of like the real system, should we do away with the moon in astrology, and then what would take its place? I was like, whoa. I'm like, you're like an astrologer and you're saying this.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's really interesting. And I'm like, I hadn't even thought about that. So like my answer was, and I can't remember if he prompted it or suggested it, but that Mercury could also rule Cancer. Should we not acknowledge the moon anymore as being the rulership of Cancer? I think that would make a lot of sense. So as an example, I guess what I'm trying to say is that Saturn having its current place right now, that's masculine, I see a place for it. I have an understanding of it, and I'll never not probably like Saturnian paintings where he's like eating his children and stuff like that. It's like there's a it occupies something for me personally, but I'm also open-minded enough to basically go along with what Cheney's saying and being like, but I think that that's the case too.
Right.
So the way I've heard it put, I'm pretty sure it was Guénon who said it, but it's like two manifestations from the same expression.
Mm.
You know, the masculine side, the feminine side. It's like they're both Saturn. You know, so it's just like two sides of the same coin,
Right.
essentially. Life and death coming from the same place, basically. You know, so there's enough in me to see the life side, the fertility, life-giving aspects of Saturn, the feminine side of Saturn, but I also see the masculine side too, and I could see why, you know, it would make sense for us to have an old man as an archetypal sort of figure or symbol in mythology and stuff like that.
Yeah,
You
indeed.
know, so I just see both sides, yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, good stuff. That's a great connection.
Okie dokie. Let's see if we had any more. I think we might be. And then, like the white from Snow White, wanting the youth from Mercury's androgynous Cupid. Huh. Interesting.
Androgynous, yeah.
Androgynous, sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
And I think I saw one more question down here. One more question mark, anyway.
There we go. That probably that one, the
This
natural
one?
law. But it's not. I don't think it's for me.
Yeah, I don't think it's okay. Well,
Awesome, dudes. Thank you for hanging out.
yeah, and if I missed,
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
here I knew there was one more. K.
Okay.
What was the system with the 5 ages? Hyperborean, Lunarian, Aryan, Atlantean.
I think Theosophy. There's
So-
a different moon and sun for each. Yeah, I'm not sure. I probably have it somewhere around here. I have some theosophical books and everything else, but that hasn't been where my head is at with that. I mainly right now I'm focusing on the 3 big ages, and Hyperborean associating with the oldest one is kind of the link and connection that I'm currently exploring.
Okay.
I suppose, but with the specific 5 ages, not sure. It is interesting though, I'll say, because I brought this up today too, and the theosophical side of things, the first expression of man they call polarians.
Right.
And
right.
so they're like a polar people.
Right.
Because essentially what it is literally your energetic body that's kind of like an egg, and then you have that vertical axis in the middle, which is what your chakras would be aligned with, essentially. And so they were called, this was the Polarian epoch, which is, I'm assuming, the Hyperborean age too, perhaps. I don't know. There could be some discrepancy there or whatever.
Wow.
But good question.
That's awesome.
Not sure.
All right. What's up?
Oh, George Mark. I asked, do
Okay.
the George Mark one.
All right. Well, Rose is in the house. Hi,
Hey, Rose.
All right. George Mark asks, Mario, do you do natal chart readings?
I don't. So I don't do natal chart readings. I do tarot readings and I do private lessons for people. The most I do along those lines with people's astrology is taking into account your big 3 and doing a reading, and we could see if any symbolism comes up with that. And so I don't do deep dives into natal charts or anything.
Robert Phoenix does, though.
Robert Phoenix does. I would say, to be honest, like if I were to get a reading myself done these days, it would be kind of no question. I would go to Robert Phoenix.
Yeah, and we have a really good friend of ours who got a reading from him a few years ago, and
Oh, she said great things.
said great things, and she made a really good decision based on what he talked about with it, and she's had good results. So
Leroy Jones.
Leroy Jones asks, you guys ever interview Jason Riza, Giorgiani?
Or Robert Seffer.
No.
I'm familiar with both.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind talking to either,
Yeah.
but no, I haven't talked to them or anything. And to be honest with you, I'm not super hip to a lot of Robert Seffer's stuff. I follow him and everything else. Giorgiani, same thing. I usually listen to him when he's on Aeon Byte.
Oh,
And that's pretty much it. I've never read his actual material.
okay.
But I know he's mentioned stuff that I've been interested in. And I know that there's stuff, like I'm pretty sure like he goes through a publisher that's like Arctos Publishing, and you know, there would be things to talk about.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Robert Seffer, he's always got some good stuff coming out. His videos on YouTube anyway. So, all right, let's see. So the branch asks, Michelle, what are the plants associated with Saturn? Well, I'm glad you asked, Joshua. There's quite a few. And the first ones that come to mind, excuse me, are comfrey. Comfrey is one that is well known that it is ruled by Saturn. Bone health, the nickname of it is knit bone because it is known for its excellent ability to heal broken bones, ligaments, tendons, you name it, skin. So we're talking boundaries, all of that kind of stuff. Elder is another one that is ruled by Saturn. There's quite a bit of lore around Saturn and Elder. And I would say that the Elder connection to Saturn definitely validates the Crone side of Kronos, because Elder is known as like a crone tree. And it's guided by and ruled by Saturn. And so it's also said that there's an old crone that lives in the elder tree, and that when you harvest anything from the elder, whether it be wood, berries, leaves, flowers, you name it, you ask the elder mother, the crone elder that lives in the tree, for permission to do it before you do so. And if you fail to ask for that permission, it is said that ill health may fall upon you and or your household. So there's a whole thing with elder that is awesome. And a lot of times elder wood and elder branches were used to make actual fencing. It was either harvested and used as a fence, or elder typically grows on the border of land. It likes the edges of properties. So it is a natural bordering shrub or tree. And so you can plant it as such, but a lot of times naturally elder will grow along the edges of property, which also signifies its ability to be a plant to help you move between realms of the other worlds. And that's another thing going on with it, is that it has the stems of the elder. There's this very soft pith that's in the center of the stems that can be dried out and hollowed. And then so it makes tubes. So you can make flutes out of elder. You can make billows to stoke a fire, pan flutes, you name it. You can make whistles from it. So that's a whole Saturn thing. And also the other plant that's coming to mind is mullein. Mullein is also ruled by Saturn, and mullein has an affinity for the spine as it does the lungs. But that's one of the things with the Saturn connection, is the joints of the spine itself being your pole, your sacred center. Mullein helping you to stand up straight during times where you feel like you're not standing up straight, or you don't have the confidence to stand up straight on your own. Mullein, as taken as an essence in that way as a spiritual medicine, is something of helping you with your structure, making it stronger and helping you to build on it. So that is that's what I would say about plants and Saturn.
Nice.
All right. I think we're good. Unless anybody else has anything they wanted to throw in.
Did you scroll all the way down?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Nice, guys.
Yeah, Cheney just says the planet Mercury circles the sun. Saturn is jealous of that time. This is what the angry old crone wants, huh?
Yeah,
interesting.
Actually, that's one of the things I brought up on the show with Robert Phoenix, I'm pretty sure. But there's older illustrations, alchemical illustrations, where Saturn is cutting off the legs of Mercury.
Oh,
and
yes.
so when you're looking at it from a traditional planetary perspective, Saturn would be the furthest one out. Mercury's the closest one in. Mercury being related to youth and, all this stuff. He's a messenger. He's a mover. So he's always traveling. And so, yeah, Saturn always robbing the youth of their energy in some way, shape, or form, because he doesn't want to get overthrown. That's the symbolism, or that's the mythology, at least.
Huh.
And so that's a really potent weave to kind of pull at. And actually, Tracy wrote a book, Tracy Twyman. So Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge. She talks about that in her book, and she relates it to the alchemy of the monetary system.
I love that.
And debt.
And
the old generation kind of feeding off of the young, and that this is just kind of how things go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Totally.
Alrighty. Well, as always, folks, we've got some updates, so I'm going to throw this up on the screen. Thank you, as we said in the beginning, to all the patrons out there. You guys are awesome. We've got Chance, Sarah G, Liam, Amy, Miri and Hank, Jenny G, Erica Rodriguez, Moonlander, Spoons, Mary, Louie, Diane B, Logan, Mickey, Debbie, Natasha, Mary Beth, Nausicaa, Stephanie, Jennifer, Charolai, Peter, Elise and James, Amy, Rachel, Trisha, Vanessa, and Doreen. Thank you guys so freaking much, as always. Patreon.com/thehealinghome. If you'd like to just go over there and follow me on Patreon, you can do that without becoming a paid member, or you can select one of the tiers that I have available for people to do so. Full Moon Offering newsletter for this month is my face and body care remedies. So this is number 40. Super stoked that this has been going for 40 months. Pretty awesome. I'm really happy with just the cycle that I have following the full moon with these offerings. Mario was actually the first person to actually have the idea for me years ago to do something like this. Yeah. And so to see it coming full circle and into full fruition is pretty exciting.
So in case people aren't aware, Michelle every full moon will put out a newsletter and she drops new products.
Yes.
Basically. And so the best way to find out what she just released is to follow the newsletter. And so you can go to her site and, you know, put your email in and start following her that way.
Yeah, thank you, because it is the best way to know what's going on. So this month we've got the Divine Pine Whipped Body Butter, which is pretty freaking stellar. We've got some Radiant Glow cleansing grains, which if you're not familiar with cleansing grains, it's actually a mixture of ground oats, rossul clay, buttermilk powder, calendula, and chamomile flowers ground into a powder, and you make it into a paste using water, and you can literally cleanse your skin without soap. And it works as an exfoliator as well, and it's super nourishing to the skin. You can leave it on your skin as well as a facial mask, you know, for 5-10 minutes or something like that because of the clay. So it's a wonderful way to cleanse your skin and nourish it without using soap. Although soap is also awesome, and I have my Mugwort Earth Hag soap, which is also available this month for the offering. So all in all, those three are pretty stellar skin remedies to have on hand. Up on the screen is my current menu, which we're pretty stocked right now, which is awesome. I just made a fresh batch of elderberry and reishi syrup on Saturday, so that's available. We've got the full moon offerings, which are all still available, and I just made a batch of my peppermint honey lip balm, which is available as well. Mugwort smudges are still in stock. I've got deodorant, and I also have a handful of fresh herb tinctures that are all available up on the store. michelleshealinghome.com.
I recommend the elderberry and reishi syrup, and usually when you put that out, it goes.
It does go fast.
So just saying, if you want some, you should get some, sooner than later.
And I already sold 2 bottles of it, and it does go fast. And I make a pretty small batch of it.
Exactly.
So I've only got 13 bottles in total. So if you do want to get your hands on that, and with this batch, I did use dried elderberries. The first batch I made this year was with elderberries from our tree, but I only have a small stock of those. So I used black elderberries for this one. So it's kind of like my OG formulation using the black elderberries. So for people who've had it in the past, it's that original recipe, just for reference. Full Moon Offering newsletter for January will come out on the 25th of January. So you can look for that coming up at the end of this month. Next week, it's the Healing Home in the Kitchen with my tooth powder tutorial. So I am really pumped for this. The last time I did my deodorant tutorial, I asked a few people, that people that were tuning in if there were things that they'd like to see me make. And Jenny G actually spouted out tooth powder, and I thought, you know what, that's a great one, and I actually have to make some tooth powder, so why not bring you guys into our kitchen, and I'll show you my recipe and method for making that. So that'll be next week on the 9th at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time from our kitchen, so you can come and hang out for that.
And this is just the thumbnail that I used for the show that I did with Robert, so you can go to my channel and check it out. I called it Saturn and the Goat Gods. He called it something else. So you can find him very easily on YouTube. So Google Robert Phoenix, or search for Robert Phoenix, and you'll find the chat. And it's under his live tab. It's under my live tab. but I mentioned it a few times already, but it's worthwhile, I would say.
It's a really great chat.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
guys had a really good energy together, and I foresee lots of things in the
Yeah,
future.
we'll be doing it again for sure.
Yeah, very cool. So let's see. Then we have symbolicstudies.com for all things Mario.
Yes, indeed. So if you guys are interested in a tarot reading or a private lesson, I'm doing all sorts of stuff for people these days. If I can assist you in your symbolic journey, I would love to do that. And then I also have study packets. So for $5, digital download, it's an elemental study packet. And so people have been buying those and they've been liking them. But yeah, so for everything that I have going on, you can find that at symbolicstudies.com, including my other social media links and stuff like that.
Yes, yes. And that concludes that. I do see one more question that I want to address before we say goodbye. This is Sacred Center.
Oh, hey, what's up, dude? It's Sean.
Hey, Sean. I see that I've heard many great things about you and what you guys are working on, you and Mario. So this is awesome. Thanks for tuning in. Do you think Mars is the next sun or cosmic messiah since our attention is being pushed that way?
That's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question.
I don't know. I don't know if I have a concrete sort of answer for that one. The next sun. There are theories, and we should get into it sometime, actually. He's really cool. We're working on a project together. And like, as an example, Martin Kenny and his universal egg sort of theory,
Oh, yes.
that there's different ringlands. This kind of opens up a whole can of worms, right? But
Yeah.
that there's different ringlands. And to me, actually, this brings up an interesting point that I did want to bring up as it relates to Saturn. But it seems like a lot of symbolism with deities and planets have to do with how far they are away from the pole, how far they are away from the center. So symbolically, Mercury is closer to the center, so he's associated with this youthfulness and everything else. Symbolically now, Saturn is furthest away from the center, so now he's old and curmudgeon-y and all that kind of stuff. There's this idea that we live in a ringland system and that there's rings closer to the center and rings further away from the center. The rings closer to the center are more Edenic, more like paradise, things like that. The ringlands furthest away are more Saturnian. And I think we live somewhere in between. I'm not opposed to this cosmology or cosmography, I guess. And so it seems like we live somewhere kind of in between. And according to what he has said is that Mars and Venus would be like the sun and the moon for one of the ringlands. So potentially it's already a sun for one of these ringlands. And so that they kind of come in pairs. So Mercury is both masculine and feminine. So the innermost ringland, I think, potentially might have just one body that is considered both its sun and its moon. That's Mercury. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the second ringland out is either us or Mars and Venus, but Mars being the sun, Venus being the moon. And then here we have the sun and the moon. And then the furthest ringland out would be Saturn and Jupiter, Saturn being the moon and then Jupiter being kind of the sun. So there's something to be said about what you're saying, because Mars has been promoted quite a bit. Sometimes it makes me wonder if they're kind of seeding information that has to do with it already being a sun, potentially, with one of these ringlands.
Right.
So I don't have too much more to offer besides that, but it got me thinking about that. But that's not a bad question.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Nice.
Oh, Matt Moon Crazy said just purchase some mugwort smudge. Awesome. 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 Thank you, Matt.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt.
We'll have it out to you soon.
Excellent.
Alrighty, y'all.
Right on. Okay, guys, take care.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you. Have a good night.
Until next time.
Later.